So good morning. My name is Scott Peluso. I am the Executive Vice President of Cloud Services and Support for Interloc.
Good morning. My name is Elliot Bonilla, developer, jack of all trades at Amentum on the aerials and ranges operations group.
So Elliot's driving. So this is what we're going to talk about today, right? While the title is securing for federal agencies, this can be applicable, and you'll see later on, far more than just in the government, right? If you could be a civilian agency, you could be in an industry that requires certain levels of cybersecurity. We're not going to get technical today. This is not to how to configure a cluster or anything like that. We're going to talk about how these various aspects of cybersecurity impact Maximo. You'll have slides at the end, so feel, whatever. So we're going to talk about data. And it's not the traditional sense of data that you do with a Maximo upgrade. This is not changing field blanks or doing anything like that. We'll be talking about data types. We are going to go through the basics. So this may be a little bit remedial for some folks if you're experienced. But I've found over the years that it's very good to set a base level of expectations. So we'll be going through certain data types and things of that nature so that you know what may be expected. One of the things that I find all the time is that customers aren't necessarily sure at the line of business level, and this is a good time to potentially bring in your IT team, your InfoSec team, to make sure that you may have data that needs to be protected. And like I said, there are people that really weren't sure. It's fairly obvious if you're a three-letter agency of the government or something like that, but if you do Maximo at an airport, you have certain requirements with your data. So we'll be going through that just so you can get an understanding of the types of data that require some extra scrutiny. Client roles, we'll be talking about how, and I should say, so Elliot from Amentum, they're one of our hosted customers. So Interloc does cloud hosting, application hosting, and Maximo. And Elliot will get into, the agencies he supports. But so we have a connection. We are talking all the time, and Elliot's a great partner to bring into this discussion so that you can see, from our perspective as the cloud provider, what we have to do for the data, what Elliot needs us to do, and his requirements for data. And then we'll talk a little bit about Maximo in the cloud. I hope someone will keep me honest on time. But there's a lot of information here. Depending upon the audience, and we will do a little audience participation a little bit later. There are some things that we might not delve into just because they might be specific to a true DOD or something like that. So with that.
A little bit of introduction on Amentum. And one thing, let's keep it informal, for lack of a better word. Let's make sure it's a conversation. It's not preaching or whatever. Just interrupt, ask questions, throw a joke every now and then. Amentum, long history. I'm not going to go through this slide. It's on iTest there. This is like my second stint with Amentum, let's say. I used to work for CSE down a little red square there many years ago. There's a few of CSE folks here. So it's my second round through the company. Been here 13 months now, about 14 months almost. Since day one, working with Scott and the team. And like he said, it's a partnership. It's give and take. It's give and take. It's like dancing all the time. Oh, talking about three-letter agencies, you probably see a small list. Also, we have a commercial group that just drop a few names there of the people that we work with.
So about us, Interloc and myself, I didn't say, and I'm getting to be actually more prideful than boastful, but I can say there's no one in this hotel that has done Maximo longer than I have. This is my 33rd year doing Maximo. I started back with PSDI, version 1.1. So I've been doing this, it's scary, a couple of my employees, I've been doing it longer than they're alive, so, which turns this into gray. But Interloc is an IBM business partner. We're at the platinum level. We have been doing Maximo. This is a little old, over 20 years, right? So we are a strictly Maximo shop. We're not going to do SAP, Infor, or any of that kind of stuff. We are straight Maximo. We're obviously, we have what I like to call the three-legged stool. And this isn't meant to be a pitch, but this chart is, right? So we do standard sort of consulting work that a lot of partners do. We'll do upgrades, we'll do installations, implementations, business assessments. We also have, and when you come to our booth, which I strongly suggest you all do because we've got some nice prizes, but when you come to our booth, you'll see that we have more mobility award wins from Maximo World than any other customer, partner. So we've won 3 out of the last 4 years or 2 out of the last 3. So that's our mobile informer product. And then like I mentioned earlier, we are a cloud provider. We provide services, we do application hosting, managed services, infrastructure managed services. So there's the three-legged stool part. You can see here we do commercial, again, commercial and federal. And our saying really is, you know, let us do the hard work so you can do your work. You know, we try to provide the cloud for you. So as I was saying, it's all about the data, but it's about the data types. So your Maximo data, right? You have pumps and all the things that you have in Maximo. But what you need to sometimes look at is the data type of that information something that potentially has to be secured, right? So you've probably all heard of, and I think I said, but there are just a ton of acronyms in this presentation. So try to keep up. There is a glossary at the back. But usually the one that's most prevalent is PII, or Personally Identifiable Information. And I'm not going to read all these, but you can see your social security number, you know, your driver's license number, your taxpayer ID. That's all considered PII, right? It's where someone who obtained that information could impersonate you or garner more information about you, because a lot of this information is used by systems to challenge you, right? So that they'll then allow you access. Sensitive, the only difference in sensitive, I don't think we see a lot of this in Maximo, but sensitive is, you probably see it a lot in the political climate we're in now, right? So sensitive is more of those things that go to character. And I'm not going to start that debate. You can figure that out, but that's usually what sensitive personal information is. If you're a pharmaceutical or life sciences, protective health is something that obviously concerns you, patient records, things of that nature. Federal contract information, now that's something that Elliot cares about, right? So there can be information in Maximo, and I'm not a functional guy, so I don't know where it is in Maximo, but there can be information in Maximo that pertains to your actual contract information. That's FCI. And then the controlled technical is what it says. It's the actual technical information. You know, there may be somebody who has a schematic for, you know, the ailerons of an F-18. That's technical information.
And one point here is when you have little bits of information, oh, that part number means nothing, right? But when you have that part number being used in that asset, and by the way, that asset flies in Air Force One, let's say, or in one of those choppers, suddenly your combination becomes something extremely critical when you thought it was simply the board up here. So think about that. Think about when you combine things, how do you need to protect that also? And I know there's a lot of things that we're going to go over a few times just because they're important for Scott or important for me.
Okay, so types of information kind of roll up to something that's called Controlled Unclassified Information, or CUI. And this is where it starts to get a little deeper, so it's not necessarily just the type of information, but as you can see here, it's not classified. So this is not information that, you know, it truly requires clearance, but it is information that, you know, could lead to issues happening. So it's, you know, it's not the stuff that nobody can get to, the super secret stuff, but it's information that could be damaging to an organization, right? And a lot of the CUI information, this is where the government starts to require controls. And as I said earlier, it's not just controls for the Army, the Navy, Department of Transportation. If you're doing business with the government, you have to adhere to those controls, right? If you're a company that deals with the nuclear industry, right? It may not be specific to DOD, but there are, and we'll do that in a few minutes. You'll see how this information, the government has requirements for security. The biggest thing here is the contract, right? So anecdotally, like I would think, I'm trying to think, a power plant. Now in my little head, a power plant can, if a power plant goes down, right, that's some heavy duty stuff. So, but you can't just come to a provider or whatever and say, yeah, we're a power plant. The key thing here is the contract you have with whoever it is, whether it's Amentum, whether it's me, whether it's whomever, it has to be stated in the contract because the government actually keeps a record of that. So if you came to me and said, well, I have CUI and, I have to, have additional concerns for that, we take that information and we have to report it to the government. And it's not a big brother thing, but it's called a federal registry because they want to know, there are people here that are probably working for so-and-so power company. You don't want that power company to be a target of something, or the impact to society. So you'll see certain notations that it's broad like that. It'll say, this is required because it has an impact to society, right? We all know what happened when Colonial Pipeline got hacked, right? I mean, 4 years ago, how fast did gas shoot up just for that summer or whenever it was, right? So things that can have that sort of impact to the economy and to the public fall under certain pieces of that. And these are the different types of CUI categories. So we are definitely going to talk about critical infrastructure because that's when you all get to play. But as you can see here, it's not just defense, right? Anything that's financial, right? We saw who just got hacked with something huge, right? All those, that's financial, right? And there's certainly a focus on the government, right? Law enforcement and intelligence. Those are certainly within the, the defense industrial base. But as you can see here, natural resources, right? The Hoover Dam. What's a Hoover Dam? Well, what would happen if the Hoover Dam had a problem that, I'm not going to say blow up, but what would happen if Hoover Dam had an issue, right? It would impact that entire region. NATO, nuclear has its own separate category. So there are thousands of regulations when you're in the nuclear industry. Healthcare is the same way, right? So you have different requirements, but there are some base levels, and that's what we'll be talking about today. And you can see the list here, right? So like I said earlier, in the red, just because it's unclassified doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be protected, right? There's you could have a whole different discussion on the levels of classification and what that does, and that's not what we're talking about today.
Now, talking about the different levels and the triad here, confidentiality, that's extremely important. That's something that, we take to heart, we get trained on that stuff. I don't know how many times a year. I know that mine is due right now and I have to go and do it next week. So, extremely important. Keeping the data private. And it's not only keeping the data private from you figuring out what I'm working with or whatever, it's even within ourselves, even within our groups. You're not supposed to see that. Whatever it is, you're not supposed to see that that pump broke 17 times last week. I mean, don't tell that to anybody. But it's how do we make sure that that happens? How do we label things? How do we protect things? How do we control that access? How many people here have access to a database? Do you really need that access sometimes? Some of us do, some of us don't. I'm like, I own the contracts. I don't know the database for the password. The password for the database, sorry. It's like, I don't care. I'm not supposed to see that. So, and even I'm the one running Maximo in the front door. I can see it in the front, back end, not so much. Integrity, that's critical. Again, who has access to a database? Who can go and save changes on the database? And now suddenly you make one little change and you have 17,000 work orders that went to complete. And I know somebody that did that. And it wasn't fun. Or, you know, you're monkeying around and delete the work order table. Been there, done that? Not me, somebody else.
So I was just going to say, before you go, if you're ready to go,
No,
but this is what Elliot's talking about. This is one of the things that is a best practice that, again, doesn't just apply to DoD. I run the whole hosting operation. I didn't even know his URL, let alone his database username and password. So the concept, one of the key concepts in cybersecurity is called least privilege, right? So only the people that need to know should have that information, right? Just because I run it, I don't need to have it, right? It just expands the risk of, the risk and liability. So if you're a DBA, sure, you're going to have access. But we treat that even on the support side of things. Just because we're supporting you, we're not going to go into your system. Again, I didn't say, I was with IBM for many, many years, and we never would touch a customer system. With hosting is a little bit different, but you create exposure and liability. So least privilege is one of the basic tenets of cybersecurity, especially in our context here, Maximo and application hosting.
And we'll talk a little bit more about that because those are details that I like to ingrain into my conversations because they're extremely important. People don't realize how important they are. Availability. That one I love because even though, are you supposed to see it or you're not supposed to see it, but when you have to see it, the data has to be there 100% of the time, 24/7, 365. How do we make sure that that system is up? Hey, something happened. We need to have that data. How many use Power BI? And we have all of those weird combinations between Power BI and Maximo and God knows what, and some Excel spreadsheet that's holding up the infrastructure of the company, but it's how do you make it available? What do we need to do for that to happen, and for that to happen properly on top of it? Data backups, yeah, it's extremely important, extremely, extremely important.
So I would add, just before we go into the next topic, as you can see here, in the last bullet there, so under preventative measures, lots of people can say they do this, and there are lots of companies that don't understand this. But you just can't say you're FedRAMP certified, right? You can actually get in a lot of trouble if you say that. But I think the key thing is everything is documented. Everything is, that's why it takes so long to get ISO certified. It took us years, right? Because you have to document that strict authentication. We can sit up here and all day and say, I can't see the database. I've got a stack of documentation that says, this is the role that can do it. This is how they can do it. This is who can't do it. So there's a lot to getting to be certified and to truly follow these practices. And it's constantly changing. There was a whole set of rules that just applied to DoD and now applies to other agencies and other companies. So it's constantly evolving. Every time you hear those threats that happened, it usually generates some sort of government mandate or order. It changes something, right? So yeah, and again, I think from a hosting perspective, the part about databases, right? Am I going to keep the database in the same location that my application or cluster server's in, right? Do I need to keep it physically X amount of miles away from the data? Those are true requirements as you start to go up the ladder of the types of hosting that you either offer or that is required. So, this is a good time. So, questions? Anything bring to mind? Comments? Concern? You cannot comment about my Boston accent, but if there's anything else that you have.
Don't be shy.
Go Sox. But, okay, so cybersecurity one-on-one. So now it's time to we probably should have maybe put this first, but I'd like every single person to stand up, please. You all have to participate. So this critical infrastructure, as you can see, and I don't read charts, but I think the definition here is critical, no pun intended. So critical infrastructure includes all assets, systems, and networks, physical and virtual, that are essential to the economy. Remember I said that 5 minutes ago. National public health, safety, and security of organizations and industries. And then they list a couple sections. So what I like to do, because Maximo isn't, you know, some commercial grade tutti frutti application that gives you, you know, a little game you can play on your phone. So if you fall into chemical, please sit down. If you fall into commercial facilities, sit down. Wow, usually I have a couple people by now. If you're in communications, wow. If you're in manufacturing, really? I'm going to ask you people, if you're still standing, what business you're in. Dams are kind of specific. I didn't think I saw a Hoover Dam on the list of attendees. If you're in the defense industrial base, oh, thank God. If you're in emergency services, if you're in energy, any sort of energy, financial services, food and agriculture, and that includes CPG. So if you're a food manufacturer like Morgan Foods or Leprino or any of those kinds of things. Government. There we go. Healthcare and public health. IT. All right. You guys getting tight. Nuclear. You and me are going to have a talk. Transportation systems. Wastewater.
Water and wastewater.
There we go. I've only ever once, I was getting nervous, but I've only ever once had some person standing, and of course I called on them, and it was Disney. And you know, there's actually a government agency that would say that Disney is actually, because it's such a large public venue, would be critical, but we won't go down that aspect. So as you can see, right, everybody here has critical information. We try to say, you have to tell us, as a hosting provider, whether it's us, whether it's Progitech, whether it's IBM, that is on you, right? Like I said, it goes into a contract, but at the end of the day, I don't know what's in your data, right? Like Elliot said, a reference to something that's super critical in not classified, but super critical, might only have a number reference, but that number goes back to Air Force One. So it is dependent upon you to tell your provider what's critical and that you have critical information. So there's a lot of misconception about FISMA. And we're going to talk, and we're kind of in succession. We're going to talk about FISMA, we're going to talk about NIST or NIST, and we're going to talk about FedRAMP and CMMC. But basically, and a lot of people get confused. It took me forever to understand the difference between FISMA and FedRAMP. So I'm not going to read this whole thing. But basically, FISMA is a law. So Congress introduced, the Federal Information Security Management Act. It's a law. And it, like I said, it just says you got to be careful, who might be, it identifies who, but it defines the framework of guidelines. It's a law. You can't be FISMA certified, right? It's the law that the government passed. And again, Elliot talked about the different levels. So, you know, again, there's a ton of stuff underneath FISMA, but FISMA basically says you need to be compliant, right? The country needs compliancy, and there's a law for compliancy, just like there's a law to pay your taxes. NIST, or the National Institute of Standards, they're the ones that develop the actual guidelines. So NIST says, okay, I'm going to take FISMA, which is probably 1,000 pages because the government likes to just write these laws that are huge. But NIST creates the standards and guidelines, and there's a ton of them, right? So we're only going to talk about a couple. So 853 traditionally used to apply to the DoD only. 800-171 was everyone else that was in here that didn't say they were federal, right? So if your transportation, if your wastewater, you would fall under 800-171. If you work for the Department of Commerce or the US Navy, you would fall under 853. Now what's happening now is because the world is just going to hell in a handbasket, a lot of what's in 853 is now starting to be brought into 800-171. So there's still specific military controls, but there's a lot of that was in 853 with revision 5 is floating down into what you all folks do. I don't think I'm going to go through them. There's like 14 different categories of controls. Suffice to say that I think for 800-171, there's 110 controls. For 853, there's 1,250 controls. So as you can see, there's a big gap there. So then the last piece of the puzzle, if FISMA is the law, NIST develops the standards, CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, if anyone can say that fast 3 times, I'll give you something. That defines that a company or organization has an attestation that they have met that. So the government defines law, but they also keep control, it's a very stringent process, to be the certifier of that. I can't just go to the yellow pages and say, oh, who's going to certify me? There's a very limited number, they're called C3PAOs, who can actually do the certification. They're the ones that would go in and I think ours took, I don't know, again, months. We had to meet with them several times. We had to do physical walks of our facilities. It was extremely complex to get our ISO and things of that nature. So it's, again, as you can see, any organization that handles FCI or CUI, this is the biggest challenge. So some folks were in federal, right? Starting January 1, federal contracts will start to include the requirement that you, a provider, a business partner, a subcontractor, a prime contractor, has to be CMMC certified. So it's a rolling thing. So they're not going to say it day one, but between January 1 of 2025 and December 31 of 2028, if you're dealing with the government, there will be this requirement at some point in a contract. So if I'm a partner, whether I'm a prime or I'm a sub, whatever the case might be, there will be contracts that I might not be able to bid on if I don't have that certification. And the primes, you know, the big boys of the group, they won't even come to a subcon if they don't have that certification. They're not allowed to by law. So this changes the game substantially. So the government wants to ensure that all the parties that are working with their data have met the requirements as established by NIST and have been certified that, yep, we've made those, we've got to that point. So, in FedRAMP, the easiest way to explain this is FISMA is for non-cloud, right? It has the same sort of requirements, the same sort of controls. FedRAMP is for the cloud. So FedRAMP, Federal Risk Authorization Management Program, the providers, whether it's a company or an application, many government, I mean, I'm sure most folks on the federal side heard and know what an ATO is, right? Usually an ATO will say that the application, or in the parlance of FedRAMP, the cloud services offering, has to be FedRAMP authorized, right? And again, you have to go through a whole bunch of things to get either your operation FedRAMP authorized. So for example, AWS, Azure, IBM Cloud are FedRAMP authorized cloud service providers. That's their offering. Now, everyone here runs Maximo, right? So Maximo is a cloud service offering, FedRAMP authorized for Maximo 7613 and below, and Tririga 7, whatever Tririga's numbers were. But what I put in red here is because, as you've heard, and probably throughout this week and wherever, you know, the MAS upgrade's upon us, right? I mean, I think I'm giving a session tomorrow on the upgrade, but the upgrade's upon us. Unfortunately, if your agency or your company requires that the application be FedRAMP authorized, you're kind of out of luck right now, because IBM has yet to do that. Now, it's roadmapped for Q1, we'll say, because in IBM, and I'm an IBM, Q1 really means March 31 at 11:59. But that's when it's roadmapped to be FedRAMP authorized. So, yes, sir.
Kind of quick question regarding how this relates to FISMA and FedRAMP. I think you touched on it a little. Can you just kind of clarify how those two, I guess, connect? And FedRAMP is just several levels above FISMA, right? Or just kind of security above FISMA?
Well, it is, but the big distinction is between, and it's like ISO. I don't know if you're familiar with ISO, but you know, ISO 27001 is the certification of your operations, right? ISO 27017, sorry for all the whatever, is your cloud operations. And FISMA and FedRAMP is the same way. So I know for a fact, there's an IBMer who's going to give a presentation at some point that says Maximo is FISMA certified. You can't be FISMA certified, right? FISMA is just about process, right? But it's more operational. But FedRAMP is what the government looks to say, can I use that solution, whether it's a hosting provider or an application, right? You could go in, Salesforce is a FedRAMP. Some people, they make a distinction where they'll say a service provider, AWS, whatever, is called FedRAMP certified. And then you'll hear some people say a solution, such as Maximo, Salesforce, whatever, is FedRAMP authorized. They kind of mean the same thing. But you can do either or, right? So IBM is FedRAMP certified, their cloud, but they have to go through all the mechanisms for Maximo. Because when you go to the FedRAMP marketplace, which there is a marketplace, there's about, I think the latest count is 427 actual FedRAMP authorized solutions. So if you're a procurement person for the Navy, right, and you need a solution, but it has to have an ATO on it, you can go to the marketplace, you can type in asset management or whatever, and you will get those that are certified. It has the ATO, and it's really meant to say, okay, Air Force certified this. I don't have to go through that hassle of doing it again. It's got an ATO, it's in the marketplace, I can take it. I hope that helps. I hope that was the right answer.
And then just a bit of a follow-up. If a product, kind of like Maximo, let's say, does reach a FedRAMP moderate, I know it's a Q1, does that just, can we just clearly assume that FISMA is met as well if they are
Yes.
FedRAMP certified? Okay.
Yeah, they're all, that's that like kind of FISMA, FedRAMP, NIST. You know, when you get to the point that something's FedRAMP, it's met the requirements of FISMA.
Everything below?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And
You're welcome.
one thing to remember is that I like to look at it like an onion. So the provider, the servers, whatever you want to call it, that has to be certified. The software has to be certified. Scott was saying the ATO, that's extremely important. I show up with, shiny new app, whatever. Yeah, you cannot bring this in here. Where's your search? I'm like, come on, but it's so cool. Nope.
Yeah. And then again, there's a bunch of different impact levels. So, you know, IBM Commercial can handle CUI information. It just depends on what level you need for that information. I think we're going to skip this chart because we're at 10. This is strictly DoD. It's got a same sort of critical level that FedRAMP and NIST have. This really just shows what you have available to you today from a cloud provider. right? So from a cloud service provider, if you want to run Maximo, every single one of them have what I say, they've got three sort of levels. AWS, it's moderate, it's global, right? So what it means is you can host it on AWS in Canada, AWS in the US, AWS in Germany. There are no real requirements. The next level, AWS GovCloud, as you can see, it can handle more sensitive types of data, and it starts to have things like US citizens only, right? And I'm going to throw this in now. We were talking about it earlier.
Yeah.
Like, for example, Elliot has CUI in his database. I have staff in Peru. We've got staff in India and Canada. If he makes a phone call into support, I don't have the Peruvian or the Canadian or the Indian take his calls, right? So we have to institute that, like I said earlier about instituting those sort of things. So the same thing applies to cloud providers. So you can then I always like to make fun, the ones that have asterisks, nobody gets into those. You have to have top secret clearance. So for secret cloud, as you can see, they put secret in it. Those are really where those three-letter acronyms go to. You have to be sponsored by the agency. I couldn't just create an account in, Azure Government Secret. That's not going to happen. They're physically located differently than the mid-level, and they're very, very tightly controlled.
Dovetailing into Scott's comment about phone calls, that's actually a life example. I call them once in a blue moon, and I get I cannot talk to you. Don't call me, somebody will call you. And within 2 minutes, I get a phone call on my cell going like, hey, so-and-so told me this. So that's extremely important. Those items that you see up here are things that are extremely important to us. FedRAMP certified, we've said it like, I don't know how many times. Who does what? We were talking earlier about that dance. I get on the phone with his DBA, we agree how we're going to do something, and we go and do it. But there's always that conversation to make sure that we're not breaking anything, any rules, any laws. All of that needs to be covered. Access control. And that's one I'd like to talk a little bit about. We raise the hand, who has max admin, right? Do you need that access to do your work? Probably not. 99% sure most of the time, those two are going the other way, but it depends on what you do. And I always try to treat it as the least amount of access possible. So everybody goes like, authorize everything for the app. No, it's the other way around. Read only. Do you need to do anything? Tell me what, and then I'll figure out how to give you just that access. And you start working your way up. Because if not, it's just a free-for-all, everything's open. Change control, extremely important. Anytime I want to change something, I send them an email. Hey, we're doing this. We need a database configuration. They get an email. It's that exchange to make sure that everything stays there. Uptime, extremely important. Because availability, that we talked earlier, it has to be there. It has to work. Let me see what else. Infrastructure, Scott covered that. Yeah. Talking about what Interloc provides. Best practices. Zero trust. Again, we've said 3-4 times the same thing. Let's make sure, let's control. Keep a cage around it. Keep your hands up all the time.
Can I jump in for 1 second?
Yeah.
Everybody know what zero trust is? Does everybody like their InfoSec team? Right? I can tell you that the people in the back room from Interloc hate me, because if you're in the position of being a cloud provider like this, it impacts the entire company culture, right? So, for example, there are applications that I have to go to the executive team and say, I'm sorry. Gaming sites, social media sites, they're open doors for cybersecurity hackers to come in. So it's not just my ops team, right? So when Elliot's talking about least privilege, that's, who needs to do what to service him. But to get some of those certifications, you have to do that company-wide. So we've had to change the culture of the entire company, and it can be tough. When all of a sudden I say, And I'm looking at the person who heats me the most with this stuff, and I say, no Facebook. Sorry. You know, no Steam, no TikTok. I mean, the government's already, you can't use TikTok, but, you know, there's lots of things that you need to do. And zero trust is what makes people not like InfoSec, because zero trust says, I don't trust you, right? Because as much as people talk about hacking, we could do a whole presentation on zero trust. That's all insider threats, right? And it's not to say that you're a malicious person, but, you know, we were talking about this the other day. You know, if you get a phishing attempt and you click on it, you are considered technically an insider threat because you clicked on a fish, and I know I didn't mean to point at you, but you know, how many people have seen or heard of the fish to, you know, this is my CEO and I need some gift cards, right? We've had it twice where someone hit the button, right? So those are insider threats. And that's what zero trust is. Really, zero trust is I don't trust anybody. I trust the CEO because he's a nice guy, but everyone else, my InfoSec guy, he doesn't care what their role is. He's looking to make sure that they're not exposing the company from the opposite end.
A couple of things, if you notice that one, generic accounts, then we say it again here.
Oh, yeah.
Generic accounts, again, important things, don't let anybody go in there, do whatever they want. Just let's make sure it's controlled.
Well, I think a good example of that is how many people, the account to manage Maximo is called sysadmin or maxadmin. I know you won't raise your hand, but I know you do. I can see you laughing, right? That is not allowed, right? Because how do you know it's you or you or you, right? So this is a major control is identity and access, right? So even in our company, my IT team, they don't use IT admin. Actually, we use IT admin within another denominator so that I can know which IT admin it is. And you know, again, I go back. We've seen sysadmin, you know, I can't tell you how many people put sysadmin, and that's what the sysadmins use.
And that's the password too.
Usually, yeah. It's like Wilson. How many people still have Wilson in their database? As people are starting to go, I know we're tight on time. This is just some of the tools Interloc uses, right? So there are whole sets of tools, and it really just goes back to the point of certification. Certification efforts aren't just resource intensive, right? There's a lot of money, you know. We don't use Microsoft Office. We use Microsoft Office GCC High. All that means is they charge us 20% more to keep it in a secure facility and things of that nature. You know, there are 1 billion vulnerability scanners out there, but only certain ones are certified. So, you know, what we expended in resources, we've probably spent twice that amount in software and services, right? You know, we talked about CMMC. I can't tell you what we've expended. And then even to get certified, it's another 50 grand. So it's very expensive. You know, it's an expensive investment for a corporation. And then this is just, again, you'll get the presentation. These are just some useful links. The Colonial Pipeline is excellent read if you're into cybersecurity. To understand the impact of Colonial Pipeline 4 or 5 years ago, it's scary, right? So I know we have just like 2 minutes. Questions, comments? Yes, sir.
Are any of your customers using your cloud or any of your customers using their cloud, your cloud, to host their AI language modeler?
Ours, no.
No. Okay.
No. Again, I don't know that we necessarily, I don't want to sound cavalier, care about what their data is. So the question is, like I said, Elliot would tell me, but I don't, my people don't necessarily look at the data itself, unless there's a specific instance where data, field, whatever. But normally, I don't know what he does. I mean, I know the customers he supports, but I don't know what it is or anything like that. It's his data. He manages the data. I just manage the database. Other questions? I know we're up. Oh, I didn't see you there. Have you been doing that? I'm sorry. He probably told me 10 minutes ago that, I was done. Any questions? All right, well, thank you. We're right at the top of the hour.